My mom said I was ungrateful for refusing to pay for my stepbrother's college after they cut me off at 18. They cut me off at 18, and now they're calling me ungrateful for refusing to pay for my stepbrother's college. Can you believe that? Let me explain, because even saying it out loud feels surreal. I grew up in what you'd call a blended family. My mom remarried when I was around 10, and from that moment on, it felt like things shifted. Suddenly, my stepbrother became the star of the show, and I was, well, just there. Don't get me wrong, I didn't expect to be the favorite or anything, but I also didn't expect to feel like an outsider in my own home. By the time I turned 18, I was told I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. No warnings, no plans, just a straight up, you're an adult now, figure it out. They didn't help with college, rent, nothing. It wasn't like I was lazy or entitled. I was already working part-time and trying to keep up with school. But when I needed them most, they just let go. Now, fast forward a few years, and guess who they expect to step up and fund my stepbrother's college education? Yep, me. The same person they tossed aside without a second thought. And here's the kicker. They're not asking politely. They're calling me ungrateful. Can you imagine? Ungrateful. For what? For surviving without them? For not holding a grudge? The thing is, it's not just about the money. It's the principle. How can you cut someone off, leave them to fend for themselves, and then demand they turn around and play the hero for someone else? It's not like I don't care about family, but at some point, you've got to ask, when did I stop being family to them? I know how this sounds, but trust me, there's more to the story. And once you hear everything, maybe you'll understand why I couldn't just say yes to their demands. Maybe you'll even agree with me. Growing up, it was just me and my mom for a while. Things weren't perfect, but we were a team. She worked hard and I did my best to make her proud. I always thought we had a solid bond, just the two of us against the world. But that all changed when she got remarried. When my stepdad came into the picture, I was around 10. At first, I was hopeful. I thought maybe having another adult around would make life easier for both of us. And for a little while it did. My mom seemed happy, and I thought, okay, maybe this is a good thing. But then my stepbrother came along. He was a few years younger than me, and I really tried to get along with him. I mean, it wasn't his fault we got thrown into the same family. But from the moment he moved in, it felt like the spotlight was on him. Every little thing he did was praised, while I was overlooked. If he got a B on a test, it was a celebration. If I got an A, it was barely noticed. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, but over time, it became impossible to ignore. The shift wasn't just with my stepdad, it was with my mom too. She started treating him like he was her whole world. And me? I was just there. It wasn't outright cruel or anything, but it was in the little things. Like how she always found time to go to his soccer games, but couldn't make it to my school events. Or how she'd defend him no matter what, even if he was clearly in the wrong. I tried to talk to her about it once. I asked her why it felt like she cared more about him than me. She got defensive, said I was being dramatic, and told me to stop being jealous. That hurt. I wasn't jealous. I just missed the way things used to be when she actually saw me. As the years went on, the gap between us grew. I stopped trying to compete for her attention because, honestly, it felt pointless. She was all in on this new family, and I was just a leftover from the old one. Don't get me wrong, I didn't hate my stepbrother, but it was hard not to feel resentful when it seemed like everything was handed to him while I had to fight for scraps of attention. Looking back, I guess that's when I started to realize I was on my own. My mom was still there physically, but emotionally, she had checked out. And that was the hardest part. Realizing that the person who was supposed to have my back no matter what had chosen someone else. Turning 18 was supposed to be exciting, right? It's that big moment when you're officially an adult and the world is full of possibilities. But for me, it felt like I'd been shoved off a cliff with no parachute. One day, everything seemed normal, and the next, my mom sat me down and said, "You're 18 now, it's time for you to stand on your own." Just like that. No warning, no help, no plan, just a good luck and a pat on the back. At first, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought it was just one of those tough love talks, you know? But then she started cutting me off financially. No money for college, no help with rent, not even a bit of grocery money. It was like she'd been waiting for this moment to completely wash her hands of me. I tried to ask why. Did I do something wrong? Was there a reason for this sudden shift? But she wouldn't give me a straight answer. She just kept saying, "You're an adult now, figure it out." The thing is, I wasn't prepared. Who is at 18? I had no savings, no idea how to navigate life on my own. I'd been planning to go to college, but without her support, that dream went up in smoke. I ended up taking on as many part-time jobs as I could just to afford a tiny rundown apartment. I remember sitting on the floor one night, eating ramen straight out of the pot, wondering how my life had come to this. The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle, it was the emotional toll. I couldn't wrap my head around how my own mom, the person who was supposed to be my safety net, could just cut me off like that. It felt like abandonment, plain and simple. I'd walk past families in the grocery store, laughing and shopping together, and I'd feel this deep ache in my chest. Why couldn't I have that? What did I do to deserve being thrown away like I didn't matter? I tried to stay strong, but there were nights when it all felt too heavy. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying our last conversation in my head. Every time I thought about her cold, dismissive tone, it stung all over again. I kept asking myself, what's wrong with me? Why wasn't I worth fighting for? But I didn't have time to dwell on those feelings for long. I had to survive. I learned how to budget down to the last penny, how to stretch a bag of rice for a week, and how to keep going even when it felt like the world was against me. It wasn't easy, but I didn't have a choice. Looking back, that time in my life taught me a lot, mostly about how strong I could be when I had no other option. But it also left a scar, one that never fully healed. No matter how much I accomplished on my own, a part of me always carried that hurt, that nagging question of why my mom chose to let me go when I needed her the most. After being cut off, I didn't have the luxury of wallowing in self-pity for long. I had to figure out how to survive, and fast. I started working any job I could get, waiting tables, stocking shelves, cleaning offices, you name it. Some days I'd leave one shift just to rush to another. It was exhausting, but it was the only way to keep a roof over my head and food on the table. College? That dream didn't die. It just had to be put on hold. I saved every spare dollar I could, scraping together enough to take night classes at a community college. It wasn't easy balancing work and school, but I was determined. I wasn't going to let my circumstances define me. Every time I thought about quitting, I reminded myself that this was my chance to build a better future, one that no one could take away from me. Eventually, all that hard work started to pay off. I finished my degree and landed a decent job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it gave me something I hadn't had in years: stability. I finally felt like I was standing on solid ground, like I could breathe a little easier. I started saving for the things I'd always dreamed of: my own car, a decent apartment, maybe even a vacation someday. Meanwhile, my stepbrother? His life was the exact opposite. While I was working 12-hour shifts just to make ends meet, he was living comfortably at home, with every need and want taken care of. My mom and stepdad paid for everything: his tuition, his car, even his spending money. He didn't have to work a single day, and yet he had access to opportunities I could only dream of at the time. I'll admit, it hurt to see the contrast. It wasn't just the financial support, it was the emotional backing too. My stepbrother had their full attention, their constant encouragement, their belief in him. And me? I had silence. Not once did I get a call asking how I was doing or if I needed anything. But you know what? I never asked. Even during the toughest times, when I wasn't sure if I'd make rent or when my car broke down and I had to walk to work, I never reached out for help. Not because I didn't need it, but because I knew it wouldn't come. I told myself, if I'm going to do this, I'll do it on my own. And I did. Looking back, I'm proud of what I accomplished. Every step I took, every hurdle I overcame. I did it without them. But a small part of me couldn't help but wonder, why wasn't I worth the same love and support they gave so freely to him? My stepbrother. Where do I even start? He wasn't a bad guy, I guess, but he lived in a completely different world than I did. While I was out there hustling to survive, he seemed to glide through life without a care in the world. He didn't have to worry about bills, deadlines, or anything remotely stressful. It was like he'd been handed a golden ticket the moment he joined our family. He spent most of his time lounging around or bouncing from one expensive hobby to another. One week it was guitar lessons, the next it was skiing trips, and then there was that time he decided he wanted to get into photography. My mom and stepdad bought him a top-of-the-line camera and all the gear to go with it. Did he stick with it? Of course not. By the time the next shiny interest came along, that camera was collecting dust in a closet. It wasn't just hobbies either. They paid for everything. His designer clothes, his gaming consoles, even a brand new car for his 18th birthday. I couldn't help but think about how different things were for me. When I turned 18, all I got was a goodbye speech and a kick out the door. But him? He got to live like royalty without lifting a finger. And the thing is, he didn't even seem to notice. I don't think he realized how much of a free ride he was getting, or how unfair it all was. He wasn't malicious or anything, just oblivious. He had no idea what it was like to struggle, to have to choose between groceries and gas money, to feel like you were constantly walking a tightrope with no safety net. Then came the bombshell. One day, my mom called me out of the blue, something she rarely did. She went on and on about how my stepbrother was getting ready to apply to colleges and how excited they all were. I was happy for him, sure, but I could tell there was more to the conversation. And then she dropped it. We were thinking, since you're doing so well now, maybe you could help with his tuition. I almost laughed out loud. Help with his tuition? The same kid who had every advantage handed to him, while I had to claw my way up from nothing? I couldn't believe it. They had spent years ignoring my struggles, and now they expected me to step in like some kind of backup bank account? The audacity was almost impressive. It was one of those moments where I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My mom called me, and we chatted for a bit, like we always did when she'd decide to check in, but then her tone shifted. She started talking about how my stepbrother had been accepted into a great college, and how proud they were of him. I wasn't shocked by that. I'd been hearing about his plans for months. But then she dropped the bomb. We were hoping you could help with his tuition. You're doing so well now, and it would really mean a lot to us if you could pitch in for his college expenses. I swear, for a second, I couldn't even process what she was saying. It was like the world went silent around me. I had to pause, take a deep breath, and just let the words sink in. Help with his tuition? After everything? After they had shut me out at 18, left me to fend for myself, and acted like I was just another adult to deal with. And now they wanted me to give away my hard-earned money to pay for my stepbrother's college? I felt my heart rate pick up, and honestly, I was angry. Really angry. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. They had never asked me if I needed help when I was struggling. They didn't care when I had to drop out of college because I couldn't afford it. They didn't check in when I was barely scraping by, working 2 jobs, and still barely making ends meet. But now they wanted me to bankroll my stepbrother's future? To hand over a piece of everything I had worked so hard for someone who hadn't even known what it meant to fight for something? I could feel the pressure building up inside me, and I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I wasn't going to be their financial backup plan. So I said it. Calmly, firmly, but with no hesitation. No. It was such a simple word, but it felt like it took every ounce of strength I had to say it. I wasn't just refusing to give them money. I was refusing to keep pretending like I was okay with how they had treated me over the years. This wasn't just about a tuition check. It was about respect. It was about all the times I had been ignored, overlooked, and pushed aside. I could almost hear the shock in my mom's voice as she asked, "What do you mean, no?" And I could feel the disbelief in the air as I explained. I told her that I couldn't do it, that I couldn't keep enabling this unfair treatment. I couldn't keep giving to a family that had never given me anything but disappointment. It wasn't easy, and I knew it would upset them. But in that moment, I realized something. I had spent so long being the person who always gave, always sacrificed, always put others first, that I had forgotten about my own needs and boundaries. This time, I wasn't going to let them cross a line. When I said no, I meant it. I wasn't going to let guilt make my decision for me. It wasn't about being selfish. It was about finally standing up for myself. The moment I said no, I knew things were about to get messy. My mom's reaction was nothing like what I expected. It was like a switch flipped inside her. Her voice, which had started out calm, suddenly turned sharp and defensive. She didn't take my refusal well at all. There was this long silence on the other end of the phone, and when she finally spoke again, it was almost like she was trying to manipulate me into feeling bad. She started guilt-tripping me, throwing words around like they were nothing. "I can't believe this. You're so ungrateful," she said. The words hit me harder than I wanted to admit, but I tried to stay calm. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Your brother needs help, and instead of being there for him, you're just going to turn your back?" It stung, hearing her say that. She made it sound like I was the one who owed her something. Like all the years of emotional neglect and cutting me off at 18 had somehow been forgotten. As if I was the ungrateful one for not being the person who should drop everything to fix things for them. She kept going, her voice rising with each word. "You're acting like we never helped you. We gave you everything we could. How could you be so selfish?" I could almost feel the guilt building up inside me, but I shook it off. I knew what she was doing. She was trying to twist things, to make me feel responsible for something that wasn't my fault. She wanted me to believe that I owed her, owed the family, just because they had once done the bare minimum when I was younger. It was emotional manipulation, pure and simple. She was gaslighting me, trying to make me question my own decision. I wasn't supposed to stand up for myself. I wasn't supposed to have boundaries. According to her, I was supposed to give and give without ever asking for anything in return. But I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. She kept going on, calling me selfish, accusing me of being cold-hearted, and even saying things like, "You're acting like you're better than the rest of us." It was hurtful, honestly. But in a weird way, it was also a wake-up call. This wasn't about the money, it was about control. She was used to me saying yes, to me being the dependable one who always came through, no matter how unfair it was. And now when I finally said no, when I finally put my foot down, she couldn't handle it. Because for once, I wasn't doing what they expected. For once, I was thinking about myself. As I sat there, hearing my mom's voice still ringing in my ears, I couldn't help but think back on everything that had led to this moment. The past few years had shaped my decision more than I realized. Every time they'd treated me like I didn't matter, every time they chose to ignore me or act like I was invisible, it built up inside me, piece by piece, until I was finally strong enough to say no. Being cut off at 18 was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. No explanation, no warning. Just suddenly I was on my own. I remember the day it happened like it was yesterday. I had been living with my mom and stepdad, going through the motions of school and figuring out my life, when one day out of nowhere, my mom sat me down and told me that I was on my own now. "You're an adult now," she had said, as if that one sentence should somehow fix everything. There was no, "I'm sorry," or "let's work together." She just washed her hands of me. From that day on, I was forced to figure everything out without them. It stung. It really did. There were nights when I didn't know how I was going to make it, when I didn't know where I'd be staying or how I'd pay my bills, but I didn't ask them for anything, even when things got tough. I refused to go crawling back. The pride I had left was more important to me than their pity or their charity. And now, years later, here they were, asking me to pay for my stepbrother's college. It felt like a slap in the face. They cut me off, made me fend for myself, and now they expected me to just step in and save the day for him? It wasn't just about money, it was the principle of it all. They had made it clear that I wasn't important enough to support when I needed it, and yet they thought I would drop everything for him? The more I thought about it, the easier my decision became. Saying no was almost a relief. It was my way of finally standing up for myself, of saying that I wasn't going to be their fallback option anymore. I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me just because they could. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. I still cared, in a way. Even after all the pain, I couldn't just shut off my feelings for my mom completely. There was a sadness deep inside me, knowing that we had come to this point. It frustrated me that my family couldn't understand why I was so firm in my decision. They had always expected me to be the one to sacrifice, to give up my own happiness for the sake of others. And yet, when I finally drew a line in the sand, I was the one made to feel guilty. It hurt, honestly. I couldn't help but wonder if things could have been different if they hadn't treated me like I was disposable. If they had been there for me when I needed them, maybe I would have been more willing to help. But it was too late for that. The damage had been done. And now, the only thing left for me to do was protect myself from more of the same. When my stepbrother found out about my decision, it didn't exactly go the way I thought it would. I was expecting him to be upset, maybe angry, but what really got to me was how indifferent he was at first. I remember him texting me a few days after I said no. It wasn't a long message, just a quick, "So I guess you're not going to help me out then?" That was it. No understanding, no apology for all the years he had been treated like the golden child. It almost felt like he just expected me to say yes, like there was never any doubt in his mind that I would come through for him. Just like always. The weird thing was, he didn't get angry. He didn't yell or try to guilt-trip me the way my mom did. He was just passive. It was like he wasn't even bothered by the fact that I was refusing him. Instead, he kind of acted like I was the one in the wrong. A day later, my mom told me that he was disappointed in me. She didn't say it directly, but it was clear that she was trying to get me to feel guilty for standing my ground. My stepbrother didn't have the guts to say it to my face, but I knew that he was playing the victim role, acting like he was the one who had been let down, not the other way around. It was strange. I almost felt like he wasn't even ashamed of all the privilege he had been given. Instead, he was upset that I didn't just go along with what he expected, as if I was supposed to keep playing the role of the person who always sacrifices for the sake of everyone else. The whole thing made me realize just how out of touch he was with reality, and it made me even more certain that I had made the right decision. The final confrontation with my mom was, without a doubt, the hardest part. It came after days of back and forth, with her calling me, texting me, and even showing up at my door to beg me to change my mind. But I had made up my mind, and no amount of pleading was going to sway me. I remember the day it happened so clearly. It was a Saturday afternoon, and my mom called, sounding upset, asking me to come over to talk. I could hear the frustration in her voice, and I knew what it was about before she even said anything. I reluctantly agreed, figuring it was time to lay it all out once and for all. When I walked into her house, she was already sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed over her chest. My stepdad was there too, sitting silently in the background. It was like a courtroom. I could tell this was going to be another one of those family meetings where I was expected to apologize for standing up for myself. "Why won't you help him?" my mom started, her voice tight with emotion. "He's your family. He's struggling, and you're just going to leave him to fend for himself?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts before I spoke. I knew it was going to be hard, but it was necessary. I'm not going to pay for his college because I wasn't given the same support. I was cut off at 18 with no explanation, no help. I had to build my life on my own, and I didn't ask you for anything. Now, suddenly, I'm supposed to drop everything and pay for his education just because you think it's the right thing to do? Her face twisted with anger and hurt. "You're being selfish. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You're just going to watch him struggle?" I shook my head. "This isn't about being selfish, it's about fairness. You've always treated me like I wasn't important enough to invest in. You kicked me out without a second thought when I turned 18. You didn't care what happened to me then, and now you want me to fix things for him?" There was a long silence as my mom looked at me, almost as if she couldn't believe what I was saying. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "You don't get to ask me for this, not after everything. I've worked too hard to get where I am, and I'm not going to jeopardize my future for someone who's had everything handed to them. I learned the hard way, and now he has to do the same." My mom's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at me like I had just crushed her. "I didn't raise you to be like this. You're my child, and I thought you'd help when we needed you." I swallowed the lump in my throat, my voice steady. "I'm still your child, but I'm not your backup plan anymore. I won't do it." The silence that followed was deafening. My mom didn't say anything else. My stepdad, who had been quietly watching, didn't offer any support. They both sat there, their disappointment heavy in the air. It was clear that they thought I was being unreasonable, but I had no intention of backing down. As I walked out of that room, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. I had done what I needed to do, even though it hurt. I knew that things with my family might never be the same again, but at least I could say I stood up for myself. Looking back, I can honestly say that standing firm in that moment brought me a sense of empowerment I didn't expect. At first, I was filled with so much anger and frustration, not knowing how to navigate all the emotions tied to my family's demands. But when I said no, I wasn't just rejecting their request. I was reclaiming my own space. I was taking control of my life, and that felt like the first real step toward freedom. I've learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to put your foot down, especially with family. They expect you to put their needs above your own, to sacrifice everything for their comfort. But you don't owe anyone who treated you like you were disposable. I didn't ask for their neglect, and I shouldn't be made to feel guilty for finally taking care of myself. To anyone out there going through something similar, if your family has treated you as less than or made you feel like you don't matter, don't let them pull you back into that toxic cycle. You have the right to put yourself first. Don't let anyone tell you that you owe them something just because they share the same blood. Family should be about love, understanding, and mutual respect, not entitlement. You're allowed to draw boundaries, to say no when it's necessary, and to protect your own well-being. Never forget that.